Releasing Trauma is sponsored by the Global Association for Trauma Recovery. The Global Association for Trauma Recovery is a social impact organization serving as a resource for survivors and their families, dedicated to facilitating change by spreading trauma-related awareness and thus creating a more trauma-informed world. Learn more at gaftr.org. Welcome to Releasing Trauma, a Survivor's Podcast. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. I am a survivor of emotional bullying, rape, sexual assault, domestic abuse, and grief. After losing my husband in 2019, I set off on a new adventure to help other women release their trauma and create a life they can cherish. Each week, I will feature a guest expert or a survivor to share their stories, tips, wisdom, and more. The goal is so that you can take away even just the smallest nugget of information you can use in your life right now to make a change, and to remind you that you're not alone. There is life after trauma, and you can move from victim to thriver and create a life you can cherish. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Tracy Osborne. With me today is Dr. Randall Bell, and we are going to be talking about post-traumatic thriving. So, Randall, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Oh, Tracy, thanks for the invitation. Good to be here.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you. I always like to start out the show with having our guests tell us a little bit about their story. So let's start there.
Well, sure. I live in Laguna Beach. I was born in Fullerton, California, the home of Leo Fender and electric guitars. And the thing that I think is a little unusual about my career is I studied disasters. I've been working on disaster sites since the 1980s. And so a number of large-scale disasters, but more interestingly, I work as an economist and as a sociologist. But I find my work far more interesting when I get to meet the people behind the statistics, and that's where a lot of my research has gone. I'm a researcher, and I have connected with a number of people who have been through some really astounding traumas and really gotten knocked down very, very hard, but have bounced back. And learning about their stories, it kind of helped me with my own, because I was born with a congenital heart defect and had an open heart surgery when I was 10 or 11 years old. And that was traumatic. And you don't learn about trauma in school. So the doctors kind of patted me on the back and said, okay, you're all fixed, go have a great life. But I had been through a serious trauma.
Right.
But I learned a lot from the people that I met in the disasters that I researched, and they kind of taught me how to heal from it all.
Well, I can't imagine how terrifying that must be for a young child to go under open heart surgery. I mean, it's scary enough as an adult, I would think, but as a child, that's got to be just absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, it was. And to be really honest about it, and my parents, I love my parents. I was really fortunate. I have great parents, but the problem is that they didn't know how to handle it either. And they made the classic mistakes of, concealing the difficult realities from me. And then when I found out, I was in utter shock again. So, it was kind of a classic story of trauma and how not to, deal with it in a healthy way. But ultimately, the story is a happy one, because like I say, through others' efforts, I learned how to deal with it.
And I love that, because I think that's one of the most important reasons to share our stories is not only does it help us to help others heal and to not feel alone, but I think the more we share our stories, the more it helps us to heal as well.
Well, Tracy, that's very well said, because one thing I've learned about trauma recovery is that it's not a solo exercise. It's not a do-it-yourself project. It is, you have to accept the help of others. Or it's you may not heal at all, and if you do, it's going to be a long, painful process. We've got to reach out for help because there's so much great science in this field, and better than the science, there are numerous stories of people who have been through trauma and are now thriving. So really paying attention to the whole landscape is critically important.
Absolutely. I mean, it is totally possible to thrive after trauma. Even, it may not feel like it at times, but it's completely possible. And so many people have done it.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, the way I think about it is there's the dive stage where you get knocked down, and some people stay there. And I'm not trying to be, self-righteous or judgmental, but that's just a sad reality.
Yep.
And then some people get back on their feet and they go from dive to survive. But what I've been fascinated with are those who not only get back on their feet, but they go from dive to survive to thrive. And there's a process there that has it's actually a well-worn path. And if we really look at those techniques, we can thrive ourselves if we kind of follow a proven path.
Absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit about what your research has uncovered as far as that path from survivor to thriver?
Well, sure. I started my research. I'm the CEO of a firm called Landmark Research, and we do these cases all, with the World Trade Center and Hurricane Katrina and nuclear testing on the Bikini Atoll. We've done O.J. Simpson, John Benny Ramsey. We worked on a number of high-profile cases, and in doing this research, I got to know all these people, and I became very curious. So, being a research firm, we really hit the books, the academia in terms of thriving and trauma and all the related topics, and we dug in very deep with numerous books, numerous academic articles. And what we found is that, we all know the 5 stages of grief. That's been around for, a number of years. And that's really the starting process. That's kind of the dive stage. But there's tremendous academic research coming out of, I think it's the University of North Carolina, where post-traumatic growth and what people do statistically, it's been studied scientifically in terms of growth. And so we kind of bridged it from the dive stage to the thrive stage. We kind of inserted the middle of the survive and then put it all together. But then in terms of the science and the techniques, we went to Harvard and Princeton, all kinds of schools to look at their research in terms of doing it. But as I say, most importantly, we saw actual people applying these principles and then observed that they were doing some remarkable things. When I wrote the book, quite honestly, and it's kind of embarrassing to admit, I was writing the book in kind of a professorial tone where I was kind of preachy and saying, you need to do this and you need to do that. And then when I realized I hadn't healed from my childhood trauma properly, I had to go back and rewrite the whole book. It took me 10 years to write the book and do the research. But I had to redo all my research in the tone of, we need to do this, we need to do that, because I'm in the same boat as everyone else is trying to heal from my trauma.
Yeah, I don't think anybody is immune to trauma. I think at some point in everybody's life, we experience some kind of trauma at some level, especially right now with COVID. That's a huge trauma for millions of people around the world. And so, we're all in this together.
Yeah, the statistics are that by college age, 66 to 85% of college age kids have been through at least one trauma. When you get to my age, I'm 62, it's pretty much 100%. So yeah, it's gonna hit us all, and it's a life skill we all need. Unfortunately, we're not taught it in school, but we need to nonetheless take responsibility and learn this life skill so we can heal from the smackdowns we get in life.
Yeah, I think we're starting to become a lot more trauma aware, and we have been over the last 10, 20 years, but there's still such a long way to go. There's still a stigma around trauma recovery and mental illness or mental health. And, I think we still have a long way to go as a global community. But, I think it does have to start at home because we have to break the intergenerational trauma cycle.
Yeah, we do. Of all traumas, unresolved child trauma is, in my opinion, and I think there's a lot of people that would agree, is the number one problem in humanity. it's, forget incarceration, forget violent crime, forget drugs and alcohol and workaholism and all this spectrum of self-medication. Those are all symptoms of unresolved trauma, particularly unresolved child trauma. And I volunteer in prisons and jails, and I see that frequently, and that's where it all starts. Is we really got to make sure kids, as a society, we really got to protect the kids and let them enjoy a healthy childhood, because when those traumas happen to kids and they're unresolved, it manifests later on in adulthood in all kinds of ugly ways. And we really got to wake up and kind of pay more attention to this whole thing.
Absolutely. I mean, I wish I knew back when I was raising kids what I know now. I would have raised my kids in a completely different fashion, I think a lot of parents say that, but, because I definitely would have learned more about the intergenerational trauma that I grew up with, and, make sure, I try to make sure that I didn't pass that down to my kids to begin with, but, really make sure, because I have a full understanding, that I don't pass that down. I kind of raised my kids the opposite of how I was raised. And so, I kind of hope I broke some of that cycle, but you just, I think we play ostrich too much, and we just want to bury our heads in the sand until it goes away, and it's just not ever going to go away.
Well, Tracy, you kind of nailed it there, because, and as a parent, I have many moments where I thought I did a great job, and then, looking back, it's like, oh my gosh, I did that.
You're right.
My poor kids. But I don't know. That's just the reality. But we're doing exactly what we should be doing, and that's we're having a conversation about it. The classic mistake is to bury those feelings inside, not talk about it, not get a therapist, or buy into this myth that therapists are something to be scared of or ashamed of. That's nonsense. And that's what we got to do, is have more conversations. We call it, in prison, we call it sitting in the fire. It's having those really uncomfortable conversations that are really ugly, and admitting shame where things happen to us that we had nothing to do with. Like shame, I had a lot of shame around my, being born with a heart defect. I hadn't done anything wrong, but versus guilt, where we do something wrong and we feel guilty for it. Well, there's a difference there, but having those conversations, sitting in the fire, is really the first of the what I call the dynamic duo of recovery and healing from trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. Those uncomfortable conversations, they are so hard to have, but that's where the healing happens.
Yeah. And then well, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that the first one is sitting in the fire, having those ugly, uncomfortable conversations, finding a trusted person to talk to. And you got to be careful about, choosing a friend as the trusted person to talk to. That may be a great idea, but the problem is that they can get traumatized by us talking about our trauma, and without proper training, as a therapist has, they may dispense anecdotal advice that's bad advice. Or they may react badly, or they may just get simply traumatized by hearing our stuff. On the other hand, therapists are trained in how to handle these conversations of sitting in the fire. So that's the first one. And then the second one, Tracy, is what we call grounding. And grounding goes by a lot of other words, but it's basically deep breathing exercises, whether it be yoga or meditation or Lamaze or whatever you want to call it. But there's science that comes out of Harvard. I have over 20 articles from Sarah Lazar out of Harvard, where they have looked at people who have been through traumas. They started meditation or deep breathing exercises, and they do brain scans, and they see that their brain actually grows, where it's measurable from these deep breathing exercises, and the brain actually heals and resets. From the sympathetic, there's the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, meaning when to put it into plain English, trauma resets our brain in a negative way, where when we get triggered, we go through all those fight, flight, freeze reactions and get tensed up and emotional. And yet when we do deep breathing, our brain actually resets, and our brains are able to manage the trauma where the memory of it doesn't re-trigger us. So I don't know how well I explain that, but the point is that deep breathing, as simple as it is, has a very measurable healing effect.
Absolutely. It's completely cleansing, because, you know, we've taken our traumas from everything that I've heard and been told at a cellular level. And so when we do that deep breathing, you know, we're kind of exhaling a lot of our trauma. And so it is absolutely a cleansing, therapeutic practice.
Yeah. And the reason why we call it grounding in prison is that some people, you know, think of meditation as a religious thing.
Yeah.
And it has that basis, because it went from Hinduism to Buddhism, which is more meditation based. And but you know, whether you're Hindu or Buddhist or an atheist, it really doesn't matter. The deep breathing scientifically is very, very healing. But we want to get tripped up on that. It's you know, people should choose whatever religion or faith or spirituality or not choose, whatever they want. But science is science, and the deep breathing exercises, as simple as they are, have a, you know, twice a day, and even as short as 6 breaths, can reset the brain and begin that healing process. And that's a really remarkable discovery. We got to give Buddhism credit for that, because they've been doing it for thousands of years. But we got to give credit to Harvard for really bringing the science out from it.
You know, I think a lot of people, they, you know, like you said, you know, they look at the religious side of things and, you know, maybe shy away from trying it because of that. But there is so much science around the benefits of meditation, the benefits of yoga, the benefits of deep breathing, you know, that you really need to look at that, the science of it, and how that it affects your body and affects your mental health.
Yeah. No, we got to get past that. And I'm not, you know, religion is a whole different topic, and people pass there, and I respect all that and people's belief systems. But science is has had some real breakthrough moments, and I think that's a big one for people who are dealing with trauma, which basically involves all of us. Right.
So, you know, you've written a book, Post-Traumatic Thriving, and this is based on, you know, your years of research, right?
Yeah. I worked on it for like 10 years.
Yeah, because you had to rewrite it. So, you know, what are some of the things that you have found from talking with people and from your research, as far as tips and things for healing and dealing with trauma?
Well, I follow the stories of about 12 people in the book, and you know, we can pick one, but you know, along with the grounding and the deep breathing, it's always been interesting as I interview these people and talk to them and discuss their journey. There's a number of things that come out that are really important to keep in mind. One is what I call rinse and repeat, where, you know, trauma recovery, you may get into the later chapters and be talking about, you know, really, you know, tapping into that energy from the trauma, because let's face it, trauma generates a lot of energy. So if you tap into it in the right way and use that energy, it can really propel us to do something remarkable. But along with that, some people revisit the anger or the depression or the shock, and that's okay. But the approach I take in the book is that anger and depression are totally normal reactions to being traumatized. In fact, I think something might be, you know, interesting if somebody weren't angry after being traumatized, or not depressed, or not in shock. But we just don't want to get stuck there. If we're depressed more than 2 or 3 months, we really need to reach out for some professional help. And so, you know, really kind of reframing all those topics of shock and anger and bargaining and depression more in a healthy way, and realize that even self-medication can, you know, as a temporary fix, be be helpful, but we don't want to get stuck there, and we want to kind of transition from self-medication to self-care and start adapting more behaviors, more habits that are, by all accounts, more healthy. That's kind of the big picture of the journey, what we're trying to do.
So when you talk about self-medication, let's talk about that, because when you say self-medication, I instantly jump to smoking, eating, drinking, drugs, so are you talking about something else?
No, that's it.
That is what you're talking about. Okay.
Yeah, the eating disorders, drugs and alcohol usually are kind of at the top of the list. But I would add to it, like workaholism. My self-medication was workaholism. I had work. And, you get all these accolades for being such a hard worker and earning a good living and so forth, that kind of masks what you're really doing. And that's avoiding, facing, some issues. So there's a lot of different forms of self-medication, and none of them are healthy, particularly in the long run.
Right, absolutely. I turned to workaholism, and I also turned to food. I'm a emotional eater, so that was kind of my coping mechanisms. And then I too just bury myself in work, and it's easy when you work from home. It's always there.
Yeah, and I honestly, I've done the same thing, so I get it. But the good thing is you've identified what the issues are, and I've identified what my issues are, and that's really, you can't fix a problem you haven't identified. So owning up to it is a big step in the whole recovery process.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the big steps for sure, is admittance, or admitting that there's a problem. So, let's talk about a little bit about, the pandemic and everything. What are you seeing as far as, the trauma with the pandemic?
I think a lot of people are just feeling worn down, and just this isn't something that kind of bad flu season that came and left in 3 months. This is just coming in wave after wave, and I think there's just this long-term being pounded down. The pandemic has been so fascinating, but what's also equally fascinating is that the remedies for dealing with it in a healthy way are exactly the same as this research that's been accumulated over decades that preceded the pandemic. So really, we have a motto in my office that the more complex the case, the more we get back to the basics. And it's the same thing with the pandemic. It is complex, it's a big deal, and it hurt. And I personally got COVID in January. It knocked me down for 3 months. It was awful. But the reality is that me getting back on my feet was the same process as of anybody getting back on their feet from any kind of trauma. In other words, the techniques and the habits and the rituals for healing are the same.
Gotcha. Yeah. So this has been absolutely fascinating. And I could go on and on and on, but tell us how we can find you, how the listeners can find you and find your book.
Well, sure. I'm easy to find. I try to stay accessible. I'm at drbell.com, and I love the conversation. I love getting emails and hearing people's story of healing and growth and thriving. And the book, Post-Traumatic Thriving, it's on Amazon. I'm not doing this. I'm not in it for the money. We put the Kindle version up for 99 cents. And it's at all the bookstores. You just go to the bookstore and ask for Post-Traumatic Thriving. But the book's everywhere. And the one thing I would caution, Tracy, is don't skip ahead to the ending chapters where you're getting into a lot of the positive growth things. Start at chapter 1 and take it a chapter at a time, because you really got to process through each stage of trauma to have a full spectrum authentic recovery. That's the one caution I would give, because it's tempting to jump to the fun conclusions, but it's not as effective as if we really do the work and really kind of process through each thing. And it's a great book for therapists. A lot of therapists have told me they're using the book and going a chapter at a time each week with their patients, and that's helping in the process as well.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And listeners, you know the drill. I will have all of Dr. Bell's information in the show notes. If you're listening from one of our partner stations, just head over to releasingtraumapodcast.com and pull up his show, and the link to his website, the link to his book, and all of that will be there. Randall, thank you so much for coming on and talking with me today. I truly, truly appreciate it.
Oh, Tracy, thanks for the invitation. I've enjoyed speaking with you very much.
This has been awesome. And listeners, thank you as always for tuning in, and we'll talk to you in the next show.